Welcome to the Research Centre for Sport, Exercise and Performance, founded in 2005, recently submitted to the Research Excellence Framework. What we're going to be looking at is some of our recent achievements. There are two main clusters in the Research Centre. One, a social science cluster. This has research in three key areas: applied psychology and coaching, leisure industries research, and sport, culture and physical education. The second is physiology, performance and health, and this does research in dance science and medicine, research with health and exercise and sport performance. We have the physiology, performance and health research cluster. These are broken into three areas of research. We have the dance science and medicine group, which are looking at ways to improve the performance of dancers and reduce injury risk. We have the research into health and exercise, with a particular focus on the idea that exercise is medicine and treating groups such as those with arthritis and cancer. We have the sport performance group, which looks at physiological and anthropometrical parameters that could potentially affect sports performance. Of course, alongside that we had the new health scanner, which will be a really good, useful way of identifying people with health issues. Here we have Professor Alan Neville talking about the home advantage effect at the 2012 Games. Professor Neville has conducted extensive research into the home advantage phenomena, and what he was looking at here is explaining why the host nation might have an advantage, in particular those sports which are subjectively scored, where the judges may be persuaded by the noise of a vociferous crowd. He went on to give a figure that predicts the number of medals we would win in Brazil in 2016, a prediction which might be worth putting some money on given Professor Neville's track record. The applied psychology and coaching group. This group looks at things like emotions and how emotions relate to sport performance, how emotions relate to eating behaviours, and particularly trying to control your diet. One of their most renowned projects was one which was done in conjunction with the BBC, in which they ran online interventions in which Michael Johnson, the former Olympian, narrated interventions designed to help people control their emotions. Over 130,000 people completed that study. It was launched on the BBC, launched on the One Show, and it got a tremendous amount of publicity for the university. We have the sport, culture and physical education group. These undertake research into physical education, sports culture, looking at what it means to be British in terms of winning Olympic medals, winning major competitions, the sort of experiences people have and what they can remember, and just how much detail and what is the meaning of those successes to their own lives. Let's look at the roll call of honour. First up we have Professor Alan Neville with a staggering 11,000 citations. What that means is other authors have read his work and cited it in their own work. What Google does very nicely is captures that data for. We have 11,000 citations, and top of the list is statistical methods for assessing measurement error with nearly 1,500 citations. Next we have Professor Andy Lane at 5,000 citations, a growing profile. Next we have Professor Yanis Koudoudakis, 5,000 citations, growing each year. George Metzius, reader in clinical exercise physiology, a rapidly rising profile with 2,000 citations. Professor Matt Wyan, expert in dance science, nearly 1,000 citations. Tracy Devonport, reader in sport and exercise psychology, a rising profile, rapidly rising over the last 3 years. Dr. Gerald Griggs, reader in physical education and sports studies, a rising profile, rapidly rising over the previous 3 years. Ross Cloke, a rising star with a rising profile. Dr. Mark Groves, once an undergraduate at the University of Wolverhampton, now publishing a rising profile, developing some excellent research in the sport, culture and physical education group. One thing about our work is we want it to be applied. We want people who might not have access to sport and exercise science to be able to read about the research or find out about what the results mean. So we've done lots of work with the mass media. One of our projects was launched on The One Show. We've worked with celebrities and we've done lots and lots of radio and television work, and here's just a few examples to have a look at. So what next? We continue to publish high quality journal articles in peer-reviewed journals with the highest impact to give our research centre real credibility. We'll continue to disseminate to the mass media via channels such as YouTube, via capitalising on the interests that sport has to the media and taking as many of those advantages as possible. We will work with key stakeholders in health, sport, physical education, people on the ground, people with a real interest in the issues that matter, to develop research with impact. What we have here is a piece of research from our master students on the predictors of performance in soccer. So we looked at data from 46 games, and what we found was that a certain style of play associated with the most type of goals, which can be really helpful for training, really helpful for advice prior to going out and playing a game.
Does willpower resemble a muscle? An examination of self-control in sport. I'm Christopher Fullerton and I'm a PhD student at the University of Wolverhampton. I'm currently conducting a PhD in the area of self-control. So, what is self-control? Well, self-control is the ability to manage thoughts, feelings and actions. Think of it as a competition between two opposing forces. A force that motivates the expression of an impulse, so a habit, a tendency, and a countervailing force that overrides the impulse. So restraint, and often people need or lack willpower when trying to override dominant habit. Why is self-control important then? Well, on theoretical grounds, self-control appears to be implicated, or self-control failure appears to be implicated in a number of social pathologies. Thus, a high personal capacity for self-control seems highly adaptive and should enable people to lead happier, healthier lives. It is also important for sport, and research suggests that self-control influences performance. We know that emotions, thoughts, mind wandering or lack of struggling to maintain attention all impact performance, particularly when under pressure. So my research is interested in how and why people fail to maintain self-control, and then begin to develop some interventions or understand ways that people can maintain their self-control. One dominant theory explaining self-control, termed the strength model, proposes that self-control relies on a limited resource, some sort of energy or strength. And Professor Roy Baumeister, a social psychologist, proposes that willpower or self-control shares similar characteristics to a muscle. That is, repeated acts of self-control are tiring, and people's capacity for self-control in subsequent tasks is compromised. With rest and replenishment following initial exertion, this resource can be replenished and performance can be maintained. And to test this theory, Roy Baumeister has used an experimental design known as the dual task design to test this effect, this depletion effect across tasks. And in this experimental condition, participants are assigned to one of two groups, a control condition or an experimental condition. In the control condition, participants will complete an initial task requiring little or no self-control, followed by a task requiring self-control. Experimental participants will complete their first task requiring self-control and then repeat the second identical task as the control condition. And what we'd expect to see is that performance would deteriorate across tasks for participants in the experimental condition. However, a number of researchers have been critical of this effect, arguing that, or the notion that self-control is a limited stock, and argued that a number of other mechanisms perhaps explain this performance depletion effect. Chris Beede and Andy Lane proposed that emotions and motivation will serve as important mediating factors in this process, and argued that when participants are presented with tasks that are highly important to them, they'll be able to find or mobilize sufficient resources to overcome any depletion effect that might follow a typical self-control task. My research aims to bring together these bodies of literature, of these theories, specifically test the strength model hypothesis in sport using the sequential task design or dual task design, and integrate some of the proposals and hypotheses from the resource allocation model. I then hope to synthesize this literature and evidence to begin to develop some interventions to help people improve their self-control.